back to the Matt and Aaron Talk Twins podcast. The Twins keep playing, we keep picking up more things to talk about, and we are excited to dive right into that. So, Matt, start us off. How are we feeling after this week?
Yeah, I'm feeling all right. As good as I can feel about was it 2-7 Twins team. I mean, they're not playing the greatest. It is still spring training. There's some things to be looking forward to, but it's looking like another Twins year.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get into it a bit more, but I've been seeing some really lopsided scores, especially on those bullpen days the Twins have been throwing out. Not exactly the most exciting, but I would like to start where the Twins have been arguably the most exciting this spring training. Mick Abel is looking hot. He is looking great. I think he has an inside track on the last spot in the rotation. Would you agree with that, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think coming into it, I know when we both were talking about our projected rotations, we'd said that Abel's probably the odd man out. I think if he continues to look like this all spring, there's probably not a chance that they keep him in the minors. I think the fifth spot could definitely go to Abel, especially if he keeps punching tickets the way he is. And I think the big thing that I'm excited about with him, we know the fastball can bully hitters in the zone. It can get swings and misses. It can get strikes. We know that the curveball is a good weapon outside the zone. But his ability to get swings and misses on the slider has just not been there. And in his last start, he threw 8 sliders and he got 8 whiffs on it. So that's pretty good. I think we'll take that every time, and it's really encouraging to see growth with that pitch. It's a small sample size. It's against the Braves roster that I think had one player on their 40-man roster playing. So it's definitely more of a AAA lineup than is a big league lineup, but definitely intriguing to see what Abel's been doing in the early goings.
Yeah, I mean, we were kind of picking apart his game this offseason in terms of where he was struggling in Philadelphia, why they dangled him in a trade, and what we think the Twins needed to fix to make him a potential top end guy. And it is early, but what we've seen so far is just so promising. It's everything we hoped for. The big thing for me is the command seems to be back. He is getting himself ahead in counts, and that's where a guy like Mick Abel's going to thrive, right? I don't think anybody really doubted the raw stuff, the velocities, even just the movement on his breaking pitches. Like, he had every trait and quality he needed to be a good big leaguer. He just needed to get all the nitty gritty details down. He needed to be able to find his spots, stay ahead of batters, be able to really command the flow of the game. And so far, he's been doing that perfectly to the point where he looks like he could just be the second best pitcher in the rotation this year, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with all of these guys, and we've talked about it a few times, but the Abels, the Bradleys, the Zebby, like all these guys have the ability to be, number two starters. Maybe if absolutely everything breaks right, they could be a number one. Like there's so much upside here. It's just very high variance players. So like it wouldn't shock me if by the end of the year we look at Mick Abel and we say, he's a young building block arm. We're going to have 5 more years of control, and he's going to be our number two starter next year. It also wouldn't shock me if we have a year of Mick Abel where he doesn't look great and he shows flashes, and he's in a similar spot to a guy like Zebby Matthews next year, where you're going, man, all the raw stuff looks good, and there's some flashes that we can see, but he has an ERA of like 5.5 in 150 innings. Yeah, so I mean, all these guys have a lot to prove this year. There's definitely a lot on the table. There's a lot of upside to be had, but it's really going to be a big prove it year, especially for the guys who have been in the big leagues for a while. It's no longer just rookie adjustments. It's guys like Taj Bradley who have 300 plus innings in the big leagues. So I still think the Twins are going to give guys like that the inside track to prove it, just because their results are going to matter a whole lot more in your evaluation. But if Mick Abel continues to look like he does right now, there's just not going to be any denying him a spot.
So I think that we're going to see plenty of all these guys this season. I'm not super worried about any of them not getting the chance to shine, but I do want to focus in on our opening day roster and how we think that'll look, because there's been some interesting bits out of training camp, especially from Gleeman, the I guess two interesting parts to me is he's repeatedly said that after the Pablo injury, the Twins view the rotation as having three open spots to compete for, which would presumably mean that they have Joe Ryan and Bailey Ober penciled in, and Simeon does not have a job locked down yet. But then also, there's been a lot of reinforcement from both coaches and the beat writers. Shoot, even I think Tom Polad might have talked about it. How they really, really do like Taj Bradley, and they are really, really excited to give him a full season to work with this year. So if there's three spots to compete for, and Taj Bradley almost certainly gets one as long as he's healthy coming out of camp, I am kind of interested, I guess, to see how these last two spots play out because we have spent all season penciling Simeon Woods Richardson in to one of those spots, kind of figuring that he's a given with his pedigree and being a actually pretty successful pitcher last year for the Twins. Is there any world he doesn't just automatically get a spot? I mean, if Mick Abel continues to shine, is there any world that Zebby Matthews beats out Simeon for that last spot?
I mean, I don't think so. Just because, like, that over the course of a season, you're gonna have to not only use the five guys in your rotation, but seven, eight, 10 guys at times. And so it's not like the sixth starter, the guy who misses the rotation on opening day, won't eventually get a start or a shot to start. And so I think with Sim, if he's not in the rotation, he needs to be in the bullpen just because he's out of options. And I think the Twins aren't going to want to have him shorten up in the bullpen. Even if he's in long relief, he won't be fully stretched out. So I think they're going to want to keep all six of these guys starting in one place or another because they aren't going to want to sacrifice even more depth, especially because they've, as you said, lost Pablo Lopez. Another thing that's happened in the last week is it was announced that David Festa has a right shoulder impingement. He's not going to be ready for opening day. He's looking at a multiple week absence. And so, with a pretty thin rotation mix, I think they're going to want to keep everyone stretched out. And because Sim can't be optioned, I think he's still a lock in the rotation. Not to mention, he's just been better than these other guys so far in his career. I think it's pretty fair to look at the underlying metrics and say, yeah, I wouldn't expect him to continue to be better than these guys. But just on a track record basis and then also a contractual basis, there's not really a good way to have Sim outside the rotation. And I think he's going to get a spot because of it.
That would make a lot of sense to me. I think that's what I would like to see as a fan, as somebody who's been paying probably closer attention to these spring training games than anybody really needs to be paying attention. And as you mentioned, it just is more of a numbers game at some point where if Simeon Woods Richardson doesn't have an option, Zebby Matthews might just be the tough luck loser and end up in AAA anyway. The other thing, I'm not really worried about it yet. I don't believe this would happen, but I find it interesting that Bailey Ober hasn't thrown in a game yet. Obviously, he has great career numbers, but really fell off hard last year. I'm not super worried about that either. Honestly, a lot of Twins officials and coaches have been talking him up. Sounds like he feels like he understands what went wrong last year and how to right the ship. But it's just all around interesting to me that Ober had a poor season, has been coming into spring training pretty slowly. I mean, he's thrown live bullpens and has looked like okay. He's looked fine. He hasn't looked out of the ordinary in those, but he also isn't like absolutely lighting up the radar gun. It doesn't look like he's really reinvented anything. So I'm more just, I guess, throwing it out there that I'm curious to see what Bailey Ober does over the rest of spring training because he doesn't really look like he's added anything new like a lot of these other younger pitchers have. And if he can find his early season or early career form, he doesn't need to have brought anything new to the table. But I'm still more skeptical of him than I would like for him to be penciled in as our surefire number two starter to start the year.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to have a healthy amount of skepticism around Bailey Ober. I mean, when we last saw him, he was averaging like 89 on his fastball. He would later in outings get down around 87, 88. He just wasn't punching anyone out. He's a guy that's always kind of lived on his breaking stuff and on his command and deception as a 6'7" pitcher. But even still, I mean, I think if he's throwing upper 80s, that's just not going to cut it against big league hitters. And so I think the name of the game for him is going to be getting up above 90. Hopefully we can get him to the 91, 92, maybe touch 93 that he was in his at his peak. But even right now, I mean, he threw on a backfield. We don't have footage of it. We didn't see him against actual hitters, but it sounds like he was up to 90, 91 for most of his outing. And I think when he gets back on a big league mound in front of a real crowd in real games that matter, we could easily see that creep up a little bit higher. And so I think seeing the velo at least kind of be there to start camp is encouraging. And I think the hope would be that, if we get to opening day, or I guess day 2 of the season, and Bailey's throwing 92, 93, I'll feel a lot better about it. I think for him, it really just comes down to velocity because everything else in his game is still pretty sharp.
Yeah, it would certainly do a lot to boost his game. I also, not that it really matters, but Bailey Ober to me has kind of always been the poster boy of what the Twins have really geared towards in the last few years of the Falvey regime, where they generally just look for really big guys that don't throw as hard as they look like they should and are getting them up there. And Bailey Ober was a fantastic success story coming out of that type of ideology and the way the Twins were able to coach him up. And for a while, that was, I think, really encouraging, not just because, hey, Bailey Ober was actually dealing, looking like he could be a very competent number 2, elite number 3 starter in our rotation, but also if the Twins could do it once, it bodes a lot well for their ability to do it again. So even though his performance doesn't necessarily dwell on how any of the other guys that are in the minor leagues or in a similar situation or similar type of development plan with the Twins are looking, it would still just be nice to see Bailey Ober re-cement himself atop the rotation, because this rotation just really needs it. The way, or after Pablo Lopez got hurt, even if Mick Abel does start the year in the rotation and he looks really good, and Taj Bradley does turn a corner the way the Twins are hoping for, it's just hard to believe in that over a full season from at least a guy like Mick Abel, who has not pitched to that volume yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can talk the rotation to death. I mean, we've definitely spent a lot of time on it this off season. I think really we're just going to need to see how it plays out. It's encouraging to see all the swing and miss from Taj Bradley. He's been getting a lot of strikeouts. He's given up some home runs, but I thought looked pretty decent. And I think Mick Abel's been great. Obviously, you have to have some hope that Bailey Ober can bounce back. He's really only had the one bad year of his career, and outside of that, has been a really reliable number 2, number 3 starter. And if we get even 2 of those 3 guys pitching at a high level to go along with Joe Ryan, all of a sudden this rotation looks pretty good, and we still have a lot of young guys behind them coming up. And so I think a lot of it's just going to be seeing how it plays out. But in general, I feel like they're in a pretty good spot.
I do, before we move on, want to just beat the rotation a little bit more to death, because this hasn't really gotten a lot of coverage from any of the beat writers, and I don't necessarily see it creeping in. But after, especially Pablo got hurt, we immediately kind of started thinking about what's left on the open market. And at the top end right now, it's Lucas Giolito and Zach Littell, who I think are both very capable and fine back end starters in the rotation, but you know what you're going to get from them at this point, and it's good at best, not even great at best. So I want to know, I guess, your thoughts on if you would like one of those guys or not, and what you think it says that the Twins have not even hinted at talking to any of the open guys on the market.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of similar to what we thought about the lineup last year, where going into the season, we're like, man, we have Miranda and Julian and all these young guys that we feel like are, they have upside, they're promising, they're people that we like and we think can be real productive big leaguers and part of a core. We just need to know what we have in them. And it feels like we're in a similar spot with the rotation, where it's like we have all these, high upside, promising young guys. We just need to see what we have. And yeah, to an extent, it helps to have another stabilizing force, a guy that you can count on to throw at least solid big league innings. But at some point, like they're gonna sink or they're gonna swim based on these young starting pitchers, and you might as well use this season to see what you have in them and plan for 2027. If things go well and a couple of these guys break out, maybe you're contending this year. And if it doesn't go well, you're going to be able to plan accordingly in 2027. And maybe that's when you spend some money and bring in rotation reinforcements. But bringing a guy like Giolito or Littell, like I think Giolito's higher upside. He's a guy that maybe you could move him to the bullpen if things don't work out, and he could, be a decent guy out there. But I think both of them are not upside moves, and it in fact limits the upside because it's keeping the young guys out of the rotation. And as we've talked about, this is a team that desperately needs some variance and some upside cases if they want to make it anywhere near the playoffs. So I would very much be in favor of just letting the young guys rock. Of course, if you can get a Giolito for $3 million and maybe he becomes a reliever, like that's fine. It's more talent. It's another guy, but it's not something I'd necessarily be pursuing.
It's really funny to me that you brought up Giolito moving to the bullpen because my immediate thought looking at this is, Zach Littell started as a reliever for the Twins and he just straight up sucked and he got sent to the Rays where they converted him to a pitcher and for some or starter, and for some reason that worked and he was at least a functional, occasionally good pitcher for the Rays. And now that he's back on the free agent market, I think it'd be really funny if the Twins brought him back and threw him in the bullpen, both because there's not great history there, but also we just need the help. We still need a lot more additions in the bullpen in my mind. The Twins seem more concerningly set with the guys they have in house right now, which is really unfortunate because when a lot of these guys got signed, it's like, oh yeah, maybe if Andrew Chafin comes in and can, rediscover some form, show a little juice in his fastball, just like look sharp right out of the gate, he might actually have a chance at getting a job. And now it's like, well, Andrew Chafin has came in, built himself up slowly, talked very often about how he's not particularly good in spring training and how he always uses it to really round into shape. And he often doesn't feel like he really hits his stride until maybe a month or so even into the season. And he is sure showing that on the mound. I mean, he's topped out, I think, at the absolute best in game this year at 87 on his fastball in spring training. And there's just no world where Andrew Chafin throwing 87 out of the pen is ever playable. But the Twins seem like they're excited for it. They're committed to it, and they want to run with Chafin in this bullpen. So I would love to see just any other human being in the world in that spot over him. But it's starting to look more and more like we're just stuck with this.
Yeah, I will say, like, I don't think Zach Littell is coming to save us at all. Like as you mentioned, he was not great as a reliever for the Twins. He went to the Giants and had one pretty solid year, but even then, his underlying metrics weren't great. And then he's stuck as a okay starter for the Rays. The Rays have a history of getting the absolute most out of all of their guys. But even still, over the last 2 years, he's lost over 2 miles an hour on his fastball. His strikeout rate is all the way down at 17%. Yes, it's paired with a really low walk rate and a league average ish ground ball rate, but I think it's just still not a strong profile even as a starter. I mean, last year he had a 4.88 whip, so that tells you kind of what we were dealing with, sort of quality per inning. And I think that I don't have a lot of faith in it getting better as a reliever. Giolito, on the other hand, he still has some velocity. He, down the stretch, I think his last 20 games was pitching to around a 3 ERA. His strikeout rate, also not great, but right around 20%. His FIP last year, a 4.17. His xFIP was a little higher, so probably getting a little lucky with fly balls. I mean, honestly, like the real answer is both these guys are probably a mid 4 ERA starting pitcher. They're probably Simeon Woods Richardson at this point in their careers. I think there's some chance that we could see a little bit more out of Giolito, but probably not too much to get excited about for either. But yeah, I mean, I agree with your assessment on Chafin. He's a guy who's gotten a ton of strikeouts in the big leagues in the past, but that was, I mean, when he was throwing 5 or 6 miles an hour harder. And, honestly, he's never had good command and he's gotten around it because he gets a lot of punchies. But if he doesn't have that fastball there, I don't see him getting enough swing and miss to really be an effective reliever, much less the kind of, you know, middle relief to low end setup man that they desperately need. And honestly, they could use more than that. So I think at this point, there's probably not help coming. The roster's probably pretty set here in March, but definitely not feeling great about the bullpen.
And if we want to pivot into why we ended up in this situation, we are headed to an all too familiar place all too early into the season. It is hospital update with the Minnesota Twins. I'm going to backtrack us a little bit. I know that the David Festa injury is not super new, but we never really touched on it in our last episode. And I think that this is probably the most, well, okay, I can't say the most disappointing injury of the spring training because Pablo Lopez tore his UCL. But I think that David Festa, to me, had the most to prove out of any of these young guys entering spring training with the Twins. I think that, guys like Taj Bradley maybe had more of a role to claim, but he's largely already shown more in the major leagues and pretty much had a spot locked down. David Festa really feels like he was already entering the year in an in between place where he hasn't looked great in the times he has been in the Twins rotation. He's been in the rotation far too infrequently because of previous injuries, and he very much came into this spring training without a guaranteed job, which to me made him the guy with the most to prove out of spring training. And now on top of him not getting a starting job out of spring training, which is what I would have liked to see, and I think most of the Twins fans and organization would like to see, he's not even going to be available to convert into our bullpen, which is something that I have a sneaky feeling the front office was banking on, maybe if it wasn't Festa out of one of our younger rotation options. So I don't really know what to expect for David Festa when he finally does get healthy. It's going to be after the season starts. And I think that just makes him too late to claim a job in this rotation. I don't think, barring some catastrophic, absolutely terrible, no good start to the year from any of like the Taj, Mick Abel, Simeon, Zebi, whoever gets those last three spots, he's not a guy that is just going to immediately deserve and warrant a spot in the rotation when he's healthy. So my immediate thought is David Festa just ticketed for the bullpen now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would make sense. Not only is he hurt to start this year, but he missed the whole second half of last season with a shoulder injury. Now, the Twins say the two injuries are unrelated, but it's still back to back years of significant arm problems. And for a guy who hasn't necessarily been the most durable in the past, he's a guy who kind of has a dead zone fastball, but a pair of very good off speed pitches. He just kind of fits the profile as someone who could move to the bullpen, add a couple ticks on the fastball, and really jump to the next level. So I would love to see David Festa in the bullpen. I think that's the natural next step. It's probably not what the Twins were hoping for even a year or two ago, but I think it makes all the sense in the world, and he could really thrive in that role. It would make this Twins bullpen look a lot better. I think another guy I want to touch on out of spring, Alan Roden is hitting 500 in the early goings. Now, this is 16 plate appearances. Pretty much everything we're going to talk about is really small sample size. Take it with a grain of salt. But Alan Roden's looked good so far. I think he's a guy that we're both pretty high on. I think I'm probably higher on him than you are. But I think he's a guy that could really claim that left field spot, and I would love to see it.
Yeah, I mean, in his most recent article, Aaron Gleeman touched on just how poor the defense was last year. Twins were one of the worst defenses in the league last year, and they followed it up by right now running it back. I mean, Matt Wallner has been a problem in right field, but he at least hits enough to stay there. If Trevor Larnach opens the season as our left fielder, that's a massive black hole out there for a guy who hasn't really earned the job hitting wise. Obviously, Brooks Lee, I think you just have to hope that he improves because they spent such a high pick on him. They really don't have anything ready made behind him to step in. So, for better or worse, they're going to see what he looks like as a shortstop again this year. But even if you just go across the field, Royce Lewis, great arm at third base, pretty average reaction times, pretty average range. He's not going to wow a ton of people, even if he got better there. Luke Keeschel, you just hope it gets better, further removed from his Tommy John surgery. But our first base additions this offseason, Josh Bell, Victor Caratini, is an old guy who was already just an okay, maybe like above average defender at his peak, who's now well past his prime defensively in Josh Bell, and a bat first catcher in Caratini, who has very minimal experience at first base. So to me, the Twins need all the defensive help they can get. They have a lot of that, I think, sitting on their bench is what the expectation is going to be. I know I was really hyping up Ryan Creedler last week, and it sounds like the Twins also like him to really make the roster, but anytime they can just get a little edge, even if that's throwing out Alan Roden in left field over Trevor Larnach, it's going to do wonders for a team that has been so terribly defensively recently.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. We've spent a good amount of time this offseason again talking about the defense. I think my understanding and my thought is that the Twins are going to do everything in their power to keep Trevor Larnach out of left field. I mean, they did that last year, even with him almost exclusively DHing. And so I think left field is probably going to be either Roden or Martin to start the year, with an outside chance at Emmanuel Rodriguez. And I think that's, I mean, I'm not a huge Martin believer, but I think there's some real reasons to believe that Erod or Roden could bring some juice to that spot and for sure bring way better defense than either Larnick or Austin Martin out there. So I think there's some reasons for optimism, especially in the or in the outfield. Some other guys you already talked about Royce Lewis a little bit, but he has right side tightness, so he's going to be banged up for the next week or so. It sounds like it's not something that's going to affect him for opening day. He said that he would already be playing through it if it was the regular season. Twins are hoping to get him back on the field early next week. So I definitely think that that's something to keep an eye on, especially given Royce's injury history. But probably not something that's going to affect the Twins when meaningful games start up. Also, talking about the outfield, one reason for a little bit less optimism, Walker Jenkins pulled his hamstring again. It's a grade 1 strain. It's pretty minor. He'll be back in a couple weeks, but just not what you want to see for a guy who's dealt with some lower body injuries the last few years. And finally, and probably least consequentially, Julian Merriweather also has a hamstring strain. He'll probably be back in a few weeks, but probably putting an end to his spring battle. Probably unlikely he was going to make the bullpen out of camp, but that's probably dead in the water.
I gotta say, even as a guy who has been putting in a tremendous amount of focus on spring training, certainly much more than I think I ever have in years past, had no idea that Julian Merriweather pulled a hamstring or that he was even still in camp. Still always a little amazed how you pick up on all these minor little details, but I think the one that really is the biggest blow there, like Royce Lewis will be back, he'll be fine. It's just so frustrating seeing Walker Jenkins go from injury to injury to injury because despite all these injuries, he's been able to progress super fast through the minor leagues. But at some point a guy goes from being injured a lot to being injury prone, and there's no real science behind it. It's more of just a gut feeling. But we've seen a lot of really injury prone guys come through the Twin system recently. Part of that is just their own doing. They like to target guys that are higher on upside that have maybe been falling and sliding because of injury concerns. Connor Prelip is another fantastic example of that. But at some point, you start to really wonder how much these injuries are going to affect a guy's ability to have a long term career, even if he does end up getting over them and playing, Byron Buxton level of games every year. Is he going to be able to continue to put up the star production that has been expected of him and we have been seeing so far in the minor leagues? So I'm not going to overreact too hard yet, but I would really like to see Walker Jenkins play a lot of games this year and put a lot of those concerns to rest.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two sides to it. So I think there's some people in sports who think the idea of being injury prone is overrated or overblown. And I think to some extent that's true. There's some guys who have had bad luck. They might have a lot of freak injuries, and it makes it look like this guy's always out. He's always on the IL. Like, this guy just can't stay healthy. But it's kind of outside of his control, and it's just kind of bad luck. And there might not be any reason to think that that guy is more likely to get injured going forward. But I think one thing that the Twins have dealt with is a lot of guys who have recurring soft tissue injuries. We've seen that with Byron Buxton, his hips and his knees. We've seen that with Royce Lewis, with pretty much everything in his lower body. And so I think the big thing here is I think it's I mean, kind of tough to see Walker Jenkins suffer his second, but really his third hamstring injury in his last 2 years. I say it's really his third because he hurt his hamstring in spring training last year, came back, played one game, and re injured it and missed a couple months. So I think it's just disheartening to see him have an injury reoccur. And it makes me think it could be a chronic or like pretty consistent theme, at least for his hamstrings. But just in general, I think part of it too is, as you touched on, the Twins tend to go after guys who have a lot of talent, they have a lot of upside. But with that, they might have some more injury risk. Walker Jenkins, if he doesn't break his hamate bone in high school, which again, I'm not saying a broken hamate bone means that you're going to be injury prone in your legs in 3 years, right? But he wouldn't have been available at the fifth pick if he didn't break his hamate bone his senior year. Brooks Lee wouldn't have been available at their pick if he didn't have a history of back problems. Connor Prelip probably would have been in the conversation for the 101 or top 5 pick if he hadn't gotten Tommy John surgery and only thrown, I think, single digit innings in college. So, I mean, I think the Twins, more so than a lot of teams, have a willingness to go after guys who are coming off of injury or might not have the workload of other players of their pedigree. And I think they've gotten some mixed results there. I also think one of their superpowers is also one of the reasons we see a lot of injuries. And what I mean by that is the Twins have a real knack for finding unheralded, mid-major, bigger framed college pitchers, adding significant velocity to them and turning them into real big league arms. And with a steep jump in velocity comes a lot of injury risk. I think Kyle Body at Driveline has said this a couple times, where it's like it's a risk to do things like throw weighted balls or do javelin throws or any of the things that really build arm strength. It's a lot of stress on your arm, and it you know increases your chances of blowing out. But also, it's a real risk not to do those things. It's a real risk to not be good enough. It's a real risk to not do everything you can to better your career. So it's something the players want to do. For the Twins, they definitely feel like there's upside in it, and it's worked out in that regard. But I think that's part of the reason that we see the Twins and the Twins' arms as well just have a lot of injuries, because that's just how they develop players, and that's the kind of players they go after.
It's a really fascinating thing to take a deeper dive on because I am firmly in the camp of yes, being injury prone does exist to an extent. And I'll explain that a bit more. But obviously, as you mentioned, like a guy breaks hamate bone in his hand, if he, snaps his shin, does like tears his rotator cuff, even that one's a little more on the edge. But like a lot of these injuries will just be freak injuries that happen every now and then. Even something like tearing an Achilles, like Royce Lewis has been known to do, I feel like is generally considered more of a freak injury that could happen to anybody at any time. Shoot, I had a cousin who just tore his ACL ice skating when he was in high school. So you don't even have to be like a professional athlete for these things to happen, but there is something to having degenerative issues in a lot of your, your muscles and your tendons. This is something, if we look at a much larger scope and a bit of a different setting, we see happen every year with like the NFL draft. Last season, Will Johnson was supposed to be the certified best corner, can't miss in the draft. People started, he went to the combine, was taking physicals with teams, was talking to doctors, and they started to notice, this guy has some really concerning medicals behind him. That would suggest that even if he is not hurt, he is at very much increased risk for soft tissue injuries and would likely struggle to recover from them compared to a normal player. That's something that we've seen start to get whispered again this year with Caleb Downs, who had obviously some injury concerns ending the season. Teams aren't super worried about that as much as there's been whispers that he has degenerative Achilles issues, where his Achilles might just not be as strong as the average person, might be more prone to snapping, and even if it gets surgically repaired, might just never be as strong as the average person. And what I find interesting is I think that's a pretty common issue that gets brought up in the NFL, especially around draft season. Teams are always doing the most extensive physical possible to get the most information on these guys. And maybe that does happen at the MLB level and we just don't hear about it and it's a lot more behind the scenes. But it's something that I generally don't really see addressed ever at the MLB level, even for guys who are clear cases of potentially having this type of degenerative issue that would stop them from having a full, healthy, productive career. And I wonder if that's something that teams just don't have access to or they just choose not to look at, they choose to ignore, they don't really want to know, because baseball is, I would say, pound for pound, probably the sport with the most unnatural movement involved in it, right? Like basketball, you're running up and down the court, dribbling is a pretty natural motion. Taking a shot, unless you're Lonzo Ball, pretty natural, smooth motion. Even football, like catching a pass, holding the football, even throwing it. Throwing a football is probably the closest thing in sport in terms of exertion wise in your body to being a pro baseball player. These guys are doing unnatural things with their bodies every day, which, if anything, would only lend them to being the types of guys that are more prone to degenerative or continuations of soft tissue muscle injuries that are going to have a prolonging effect on their career. And like I said, maybe there's just a lot more to be discovered there. Maybe it's something that is already actually looked at a lot and just not widely reported, because to the vast, vast majority of fans, they really don't care if, Will Klein has repetitive elbow issues that are going to stop him from ever being a fully healthy and productive major leaguer. But it's something that I would not be surprised is an issue in the MLB. And I would actually be really curious to see a deeper look on, how do teams address this? How do teams look at it? And how do they potentially try to mitigate these issues with their players?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple things here. So, of course, with trades, each team is always reviewing the medical history of the other team's players they're receiving. And sometimes they find issues in those records. It'll cause them to rework deals, even back out of deals. So that does happen. I mean, I think we haven't gotten firm reporting on this, but I think the general consensus is the Twins had a deal with the Dodgers that included more than just James Outman for Brock Stewart. And it ended up just being Outman because of Brock Stewart's medicals. And so I mean, definitely in trades, it's something that gets reviewed a lot, but also in the MLB draft. So teams can request the medical records of the players. Now, it gets a little tricky because, the players are always in their best interest to, only hand over medical records that are really clean or only from a doctor who's willing to give them a good bill of health. So there's a little bit of like selection bias for whose medical records you can actually get. So it's a little bit unknown, and sometimes it leads teams to draft guys that they don't necessarily have faith in the medicals of. A big example of this is Carter Stewart a few years ago with the Braves. He, I think, was like the ninth overall pick. They found what they believed was going to be a long-term degenerative wrist injury in his like throwing arm, and they ended up not signing him. I think they offered him like $2 million less than their agreed upon signing bonus because they thought it was going to be an issue. They didn't sign him; instead, took the comp pick for the next year. So it definitely happens in the draft where they just don't get the guy with as clean of health as they would think. I will say, as you mentioned, baseball has a lot of unnatural motion. There's the old adage like you can go into any big league locker room and pretty much every pitcher that you have taken MRI, their elbow is going to show inflammation. There's going to be swelling. There's going to be micro tearing. Like there's going to be injuries. Like guys pitch injured constantly, and it's just when do guys blow out, and that can be hard to predict. So I think there's a lot of factors at play, and you don't always know, what kind of health you're getting in the players that you acquire. It could be that ends up being, the new competitive advantage. The team that can tell the health of players the best will get a bit of an edge, but it's so hard to do because there's so many factors at play.
Yeah. And even when you do have the full medical picture on a guy, sometimes he might just be worth taking that shot, like a la Walker Jenkins, who, granted, did not have nearly as much health concerns when the Twins drafted him, but he's a type of undeniable talent where even if you're like, it's 50-50, this guy could have a decade long major league career where he's a consistent 130 game starter, or he might not even ever make it to the major leagues because he's just going to continue to have hamstring soft tissue injuries that are going to stop him from ever really playing a full season. And if he's as talented as a guy like Walker Jenkins and it's presented to a team as a true 50-50 outcome, he's easily, I would say, probably still a first round pick. I don't know if he'd maybe be the top 5 pick the Twins made him, but I think sometimes talent can just be so undeniable that it's just part of gambling on, hey, this guy, you just pray that he stays healthy because if he does, he's going to be such a steal. The one I want to go back to, Matt's not going to be surprised to hear this at all. I would like to take another moment to acknowledge Matt Cantorino, currently toiling away, working on rehab once again in the Twin system, as the prime example to me. This guy played for Rice, who was known for just beating the brakes off of all their pitchers. He threw, I think it's something ridiculous, like 500 innings in college when a lot of pitchers will be hard pressed to get to like 250, 300. And it was a risk they took. This guy looked great at Rice. He had a lot of great raw stuff that you could dream on in a pitcher, but they also knew that he already had a lot of arm issues in college and he'd already put a lot of mileage onto an arm that maybe looked like it only had so much to give. And that's the other flip side of what I don't like about what the Twins have done with some of these guys recently is they'll take them with high upside, high potential, knowing that there's also high injury risk, and then they continue to treat them like a normal prospect and slow play them and move them up slowly through the minor leagues. Like at some point, if you believe the guy has the stuff to be a major leaguer, and you know that there's a definite expiration date on his arm, just get the guy up there. Let us see what he can do. I will forever be disappointed as a fan if we never get to see Matt Canarino throw a major league pitch, because even if that window for him to play was so short, there was a window and he looked phenomenal with it in the minor leagues. And I think that if you know you're drafting and acquiring damaged goods that have a lot of concern behind them, you have to move them accordingly, you have to treat them accordingly, and you have to juice as many of those innings as you can at the most productive and meaningful levels of baseball that you can.
Yeah, I mean, I will say in Matt Canarino's particular case, I think it was more unfortunate than anything. I mean, he had been healthy at Rice, as we talked about, and in 2019, he threw 25 innings in the minors before blowing out. He then is hurt. He's rehabbing. The 2020 season gets canceled. He's healthy later in the year in 2021, and he makes 6 starts. He then comes into 2022 healthy, and he makes 13 appearances, 12 starts, throws 37 innings in the minors, and then gets hurt and has now been out for 2023, 2024, 2025, and is still rehabbing in 2026. He's a guy who was healthy in college and then has thrown 37 professional innings. So, yes, he's looked great in those innings. He's looked really effective, especially up until 2022. He looked phenomenal, but still, I mean, this is a guy that came straight out of college and has thrown 37 innings. I think it's outside of the elite guys, Paul Skeens maybe, it's really hard to make it to the big leagues only throwing that many innings. And I think his injuries were just super unfortunate. I do think in general, we look at injuries as a bigger risk than we should. Because, like, it's really just about where you want to put your risk, right? Like, there's the risk of a guy just not being any good. He can't perform at the level you'd hope for. And then there's risk of the guy getting hurt. And if you're looking at the MLB draft as a perfectly competitive market, which it's not. Teams have advantages. Teams have better scouting departments, worse scouting departments, better player development, worse player development. It's not perfect. But if you assume that it is, then it's really just about where you're going to put your risk. Because in theory, all of the guys you're drafting are, drafted exactly at their expected value level. Well, I would say for teams that only have 26 major league spots, ideally you would like to have your 40-man roster full of all guys who can play at the highest level that can be real difference makers. And then if 14 of them are hurt at any given point, you still have a full roster of real difference making talent. This is what the Dodgers do. The Dodgers love to bring in guys who are absolute star players when they're on the field, but sometimes have sketchy injury histories. It's the same with Blake Snell, Tyler Glass now. We've also seen it with even Shohei Ohtani. He's obviously in a different stratosphere, but he has some real questionable arm health. They like to bring in guys who might not play 162 games, but when they play, they're going to be really dynamic players. On a much lesser scale, the Twins like to do that with their prospects. We might know that Connor Prelip at some point is probably going to have more arm issues. He's probably going to miss some time. But when he pitches, he's going to be really good. And I think in my mind, that makes a lot more sense for the guy that you want to go after because maybe he doesn't get hurt. Maybe he is effective. And then he just ends up being a very good player and you get a real steal versus the guy who's healthy but not as good. You're counting on more going right and that guy not getting hurt. That guy has to not only add velocity, which, as we've talked about, might be something that introduces risk to the equation. He might have to develop another pitch, which might put stress on his arm. He might have to do any number of things to make him a better player, and he also has to stay healthy. So I think the Twins' strategy of taking the guys who are already good and trying to keep them on the field is a winning one. It's just that it hasn't worked for the Twins yet. And also, I would argue that it's more so all the other things that have affected the Twins' baseball ops than it is the injuries that have held them back.
I would definitely double down on that and agree. I do appreciate, especially the way they approach this in the draft. I know we in the past have really joked and chided on the Twins for penciling in their first round pick as some sort of defensive minded shortstop with maybe some upside at the bat that will fly through the minors but never be a productive major leaguer. And there's some examples of that, but they have shown that when they get a premium pick, they are more than willing to just swing for the best player available. That's how we ended up with Royce Lewis, although to this day, I still would have taken Hunter Green over Royce Lewis, and I think that he's a more valuable player now. But that point aside, same thing with, I mean, Brooks Lee, even though he fits that mold of the shortstop I was just talking about, was considered an undeniable steal at the eighth overall pick when we got him. Walker Jenkins was a no brainer part of the top five of the draft he was in. And having landed the fifth pick, it was a no brainer that we take him. But the flip side of them being more conservative with their first round picks is they have been able to go over slot to land these guys that a lot of other teams are shying away from, maybe letting them go back to college for another year if they don't like where they're drafted. I mean, that's how we got Connor Prelip, was by signing him over slot at, don't remember if he was a competitive balance pick or the start of the second, but it's the same idea. That's what we did even in this last year after taking Merrick Houston from Wake Forest. He is a fine prospect. He's going to be an elite defender. He'll definitely play Major League Baseball someday. But because we went with a pretty middle of the road prospect at that pick, we were able to pick up Riley Quick with our competitive balance round A pick out at number 36. Another just massive mountain of a man with a lot of upside coming out of Alabama. A lot of comparisons that can maybe be made to Connor Prelip in that sense. But I do definitely agree that if you're gonna pick your risk, the Twins are doing it right. They certainly lower their floor by picking some of these guys, but that's okay because I think we've seen in the way our farm system has been ranked the past few years that it comes with a lot of undeniable upside. The system right now hurts a little bit, but that's largely because all of the young guys that built this elite promising system are now young guys figuring it out in the major leagues. I mean, you can no longer count Royce Lewis, Luke Keeschel. I believe even Zebby Matthews and Mick Abel are past their rookie status, no longer considered prospects. So I think that they've shown signs of this being a successful model to build, especially as a small market team where you really, really, really need to nail all those draft picks and accumulate most of your talent that way. But jury is still out, I guess, on if that's going to work for them or not.
Yeah, I mean, I will say first of all, Mick Abel is still rookie eligible. All the other guys you listed, correct, are not. Um, I think, yeah, in general, I feel like the Twins have kind of the winning strategy here. It's just not working out. I think a lot of it can be chalked up to their player development. We know that this pitching side has had a whole lot of success, but I mean, all it takes is just looking at this roster and who is in our starting lineup. And you say, man, those are a lot of high picks and also a lot of guys who have not exceeded expectations. You know, I think, let me pull it up, but this Twins starting lineup is pretty much all former first round picks. Byron Buxton, first round pick. Luke Keeschel, second round pick. Josh Bell, first round pick. Matt Wallner, first round pick. Ryan Jeffers, second round pick. Trevor Larnach, first round pick. Royce Lewis, first round pick. Brooks Lee, first round pick. And then if you assume that our left fielder is Austin Martin, first round pick, who we traded for. So, I mean, it's all really high pedigree guys, most of which the Twins drafted themselves. And it's assembled into a pretty underwhelming lineup. And it says a lot that we don't have guys drafted outside of the top two rounds who are, you know, not only in our lineup, but also our top prospects. If you look down our top prospects list and you look at our, hitting side, Walker Jenkins, first round pick. Merrick Houston, first round pick. Galen Culpepper, first round pick. Manuel Rodriguez, $3.5 million international signing bonus. Like all of our hitters the Twins have developed over the last few years have all been guys that they've had to invest a ton into, and they still haven't gotten huge returns. The pitching staff, on the other hand, rarely have they gone after, high round guys, but they can turn a fifth round David Festa, or think a 12th round Zebby Matthews, or whatever round they draft these guys in, they're turning them into legitimate big league arms. And that's just something you can't say about the hitting side. That's something that's really held them back.
Yeah, it's certainly not easy, like I just mentioned, when you are a small market, which I think the Twins are firmly putting themselves in that basket, even if they don't necessarily reflect that in terms of market size. Because, like I said, you do have to hit on all your draft picks, not just the best ones. But one other thing I do want to touch on a little bit is how they've attacked the international market, because I know I would say the general consensus is probably that these are a bunch of 16-year-old kids that have hardly even, like, most of them haven't even ever been to America before. And it's so hard to project that type of future, to where a lot of teams like to just take a lot of smaller shots, spread their money out, and go for quantity over quality. That is something that I think has historically not panned out, not only for the Twins, just in general. And as you mentioned, Emmanuel Rodriguez is pretty much the only international free agent that is of note in our system right now. And it's because we gave him a $3.5 million deal. And that is a lot to stomach for a 16-year-old kid who might not even be able to speak English, but at some point, if it hasn't been working, you got to reinvent the wheel. And I think in the past, especially recently, we've seen a lot of very high value international free agents. Maybe the answer is they just don't want to come to Minnesota, because when you're already going to such an unfamiliar place, as a lot of these kids are coming straight out of their respective countries, being brought into America to immediately work with these teams, Minnesota's not the most comfortable place to land. I think there's a lot worse, and I think that the perception is maybe a little bit mixed, or not mixed. I think the perception outside of Minnesota is maybe a little bit different than the reality once you would get here. But generally, I think the Twins should be trying to throw around their money at the top of the international free agent market, because in a league that is defined by being unregulated and uncontrolled in how teams spend money, the international market is one of the few places that teams are capped, are limited, and do all have to follow loosely the same rules, which means it's the one place outside of the draft where the Twins should feel like they have every bit as much power and even maybe a leg up on their competition.
Yeah, I'm going to push back on that a little bit. Just because the Twins, if you look at the guys that they have signed, they've generally played towards the top of the market on the majority of their international signings. So I'm going to go back a couple years, just because we don't know a whole lot about the 2026 or 2027 guys. Well, I guess 2026 guys haven't signed yet. But if we go back to the 2024 signings, actually, the 2026 guys have. Never mind. But if we go back to 2024, the Twins signed the number 8 and number 39 prospects in this class. But it's Diber de los Santos and Eduardo Beltre, a couple guys who have not, produced at the level that you would expect for top prospects, and that's just because there's a lot of variability in these international signings. As you said, these are 16-year-old kids, and nobody really knows what's going to happen with them. And now, if we go back another year, let's look at 2023. And it's kind of the same thing. The Twins signed Ariel Castro, the number 11 prospect, to a $2.4 million deal. Signed Carlos Silva for $1.1 million, number 31 prospect. The number 38 prospect, Hendry Chivilli, for $2.1 million. So this, I mean, a 30-team league, that's 3 players in the top 38. That's pretty good. But also, there's a reason that when I said those names, you probably said, "Who the heck is that guy?" Because it haven't worked out all that well. Similarly, in 2022, the Twins signed Yasser Mercedes to a $1.7 million deal. He was the number 17 prospect. Yober Herrera, 35, 700,000, and Brian Acuna, 39, for 650,000. This is 4 years of international free agents that have all been, pretty strong signing classes, at least at the top for the Twins. and they've produced a total of 0 big leaguers. And so I think that really just shows how much variance there is, but also the job the Twins have done at scouting these players. And there's a reason that I think a year, maybe 2 years ago, the Twins gutted their international scouting team. They brought in a guy, and I'm blanking on his name, but they brought in a guy from the Dodgers to run it. Kevin Goldstein, former Fangraphs writer. And so it's hard to say yet whether that change is paying off. Obviously the guys that Kevin Goldstein and his crew have been responsible for are not yet anywhere near the big leagues. They're still teenagers. But yeah, I mean, I would just disagree a little bit that the Twins haven't spent money on these guys or haven't pushed the top of the class. But it's definitely been a poor job of scouting and developing these players because we've seen such little impact.
To your credit, looking back at it as a whole over the last 5 years, the Twins have signed 13 guys who ranked among the top 50 international prospects in their respective years. So, I mean, they are averaging over two top 50 players per season. And for those of you who are already freakishly looking ahead to this year's signings, which, as Matt said, we will probably not really even hear about or see an impact from for at least 3-4 years. Their Golden Goose top prize this year is the switch hitting, sure handed, defensive first shortstop. Tell me, stop me for this before. The Venezuelan Emmanuel Merlot, it would appear. I believe that's how you pronounce it. So, Twins sticking to their guns one way or another. Got to build up that shortstop depth, which is freakishly small and short in our system for how many shortstops it feels like we like to bring in every year. So, we'll see. Maybe with new scouting, we'll see better development. But either way, if that does pan out as we hope, we're still probably 3 to 4 years away from actually seeing the fruits of that labor.
Yeah, I will say, like, we talk about this with the draft, we talk about this with trading for prospects, but even more so with international signings, everyone's a shortstop. Like, it's not just that the Twins are bringing in a lot of shortstops. It's like, well, if you're worth drafting or you're worth signing at this spot, you probably play shortstop because the best players play shortstop, especially in amateur ball. And so, I mean, if you look at like the top 50 prospects, it's like you have starting top 50 international prospects. You have like starting pitchers and shortstops. Almost everyone plays one of those two positions. I mean, Miguel Sano was signed as a shortstop. Miguel Sano was never going to play shortstop, but he was a shortstop in the Dominican when they signed him. So, I mean, take it with a grain of salt. Not all these guys are going to stick there. Most will end up playing other positions. But it is always intriguing to look at.
Well, while I continue to sit here and giggle away at the idea of Miguel Sano being a shortstop, we are once again reaching the end of our episode. And that means it's time for everybody's favorite segment, our monologue minute. So why don't you get us started here, Matt?
All right, so I'm going to talk about the Twins trade deadline trades. And no, I'm not already preemptively speaking about the Twins further tearing down the team in 2026. I want to talk about the 2025 deadline trades. I think at the time, Eric and I were both a little confused about what the Twins were doing. Didn't make a whole lot of sense, but I think, we still don't know what's going to happen with a lot of these trades. We've talked about it a bit this offseason, but I think I'm starting to get a clearer picture of what the Twins are hoping for on these. And I have to say, this might be my homerism or my, wanting the Twins to be good, but I feel like I am starting to like a lot of these deals better with one clear exception. And I think you all will know which one that is. So, starting off with the Duran trade, at the time there was talk that the Phillies might have been willing to trade Aiden Miller in a Duran deal. Aiden Miller is a huge prospect. It's not confirmed whether or not he was ever, truly in that deal. But I think he would have been a massive addition for the Twins. He could have been, a real franchise cornerstone shortstop. And I was pretty disappointed when the return came in for Duran. I saw Mick Abel, who's a guy I didn't know a whole lot about, but didn't have a ton of faith in. Yeah, and then also Eduardo Tayit. And I mean, looking at it now, especially as Mick Abel has played better and better, you can see the vision, right? Mick Abel has 6 years of control. Maybe he develops into a mid rotation starter, at which point he's already so much more valuable than Joan Duran was, just because he's going to throw so many more innings. Similarly, Eduardo Tayit looks the part of a 25, 30 homer bat, regardless of position. And there's a chance that he can legitimately stick at catcher. And if that's the case, it's a massive win for the Twins. Yes, I probably would have liked to take the safer option, the guy who could play right away at an impact position in Aiden Miller, but we don't know if that was a possibility. Now, I'm going to go a little bit quicker as we get into the rest of these moves, just because I think there's a little less to discuss on them. But I also am not the biggest critic of the Louis Varland trade. I think the Twins did well to get out on Varland. Yes, he was very good. He threw hard. He was playing really well at the time they traded him. He was also a guy who was getting ridden really hard. He ended up setting both I think a full season appearance record. I know he for sure has the playoff appearance record. But regardless, he was basically pitching every other day, all season and all postseason. And he had never been a reliever before that, and he hadn't been a very effective starter. And he's a guy who's pretty much just fastball slider. I think there's a lot of reasons to believe that he wasn't going to continue to be as effective as he had shown early season. By the time the trade deadline came around, his strikeout rate had already been slipping month over month. And I think it was a decent time to get out. And Kendry Rojas has the upside. There's still a hope that he can be a mid rotation starter. And if not, I think he has the stuff right now to be probably almost as good of a reliever as Louis Varland, if not better. And then you also get Alan Roden, who's a guy that I really believe in and think could be their everyday left fielder as soon as this season. So I like the Louis Varland trade. Where we get into some of the trickier ones, obviously, we're not really going to talk about the Correa trade. That was just a salary dump, and it dumped all of our hearts. It was pretty tough to watch. So we're going to stop talking about Carlos Correa. But the tough ones to watch, really, for me, were the Taj Bradley for Griffin Jack's trade. But I'm liking that one more just because I think Taj Bradley was a super high pedigree guy. He was a top 50 prospect. Got a ton of strikeouts in his rookie year. He had great xFIPs both his rookie and sophomore year. His stuff backed up, and he wasn't very good last year. Still a guy who's only 24. He has 4 more years of control. We know that he can be a big league starter. We know that he has the stuff and the pedigree to be even more than that. And Griffin Jacks, for as good as he is, and he is really good, he is just a reliever. And, the Twins have to hope. Griffin Jacks wasn't a great prospect, and they turned him into the guy he is. You have to hope that you can find a reliever like that. And it's really hard to find a starter that's as good as Taj Bradley could become. And Taj Bradley has more control. So I don't hate that deal. The one I really don't like is the the James Outman for Brock Stewart deal. I mean, you're already in a point where the bullpen is in shambles. You've traded just about everyone. I guess Brock Stewart happened third, second. I don't know. Brock Stewart, you knew you're going to be tearing down the bullpen, and you were going to need someone to throw some leverage innings. And they decided that they didn't need anyone to throw leverage innings except for Justin Topa, which I think was a mistake. And the return that they got for Brock Stewart, who's been a really dynamic weapon for them, was a guy who's probably going to be on waivers in a few months, anyways. And that just feels super light. And I feel like the Twins would have been better served, even if they couldn't find a better trade package, just holding on to Stewart. And at the worst, maybe you get even 30 innings of him as a high leverage reliever this year, especially if they had any chance or thought that they might compete. The other deals that I won't really get into for the rentals, the Danny Coulomb, Willie Castro, Harrison Bader deals, those all worked out fine. I like Hendry Mendez. I like I think Ryan Gallagher, the guy that we got from the Cubs, there's things to like about those deals. But in general, I think that the Twins deadline has aged all right. There's a lot to like. It sucks seeing the established stars succeed elsewhere, and it really sucks to see James Outman play really poorly for the Twins. But even that deal that I like the least didn't exactly work out all that well for the Dodgers because Brock Stewart had season-ending shoulder surgery. So overall, this is a long-winded way of saying I think we were really upset at the time, but it's probably more so that we were upset with just the direction of the Twins and the fact that they weren't contending and that they were throwing in the towel and that they were cutting payroll, more so than it was the actual baseball trades that they made.
I'm glad that we can at least look back on it and smile and laugh a bit now because this podcast has been talked about for a while. Me and Matt have been kicking the wheels on it. I am not at all upset that we didn't have a podcast for the last half of last season because that would have been super ugly. But I do still kind of wish we could have had a podcast up and running to do a trade deadline special last year because it's like I have been a Twins fan my whole life, obviously. My very first ever memory, sporting memory, Twins memory, is game 163 in 2009 with Alexi Casilla squirting a little dribbler right past the shortstop to score Carlos Gomez. Carlos Gomez became my first favorite Twin. It's a whole ordeal. I don't really know if I've ever seen a day as dark as the trade deadline last year as a Twins fan. Me and Matt were on the phone talking about every trade as they rolled in. It was tough, like, oh, there goes Jawanda Ron. That sucks, but we expected it. I thought the deal was at least okay. Oh shoot, there goes Griffin Jacks. Like our bullpen's gonna be really bad. I guess there goes this season. Then all of a sudden there went Carlos Correa, and there was like probably multiple good 5-10 minute gaps of just silence. We would start thoughts and have nowhere to go with them. Just a whole lot of, man, I really don't know what to say. It To this day I've just never seen anything like it as a sports fan, so I'm glad that we can at least laugh about it now. My monologue minute that I'm going to jump into is a lot more lighthearted and really has no bearing on the Twins. But today I was scouting Facebook Marketplace, and for the nifty sum of $50, I was able to find and secure myself an authentic Mitchell and S 1976 Burt Blyleven jersey off of Facebook Marketplace. $50. Over the moon, absolutely ecstatic about it. This becomes my third baseball jersey, joining the Joan Duran jersey I bought at the playoff game I attended in 22, and weirdly enough, a Nolan Shanuel jersey. That's a different story for a different podcast, but it really reaffirmed my belief that Fanatics might be the single worst sports memorabilia, sports, anything producer out in the game right now. I mean, there's a lot of leagues that have a lot of jerseys that are reaching a lot of ridiculous prices. I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen Fanatics is carrying the World Baseball Classic jerseys. Their average jersey is $200. They were selling a $400 Aaron Judge jersey that would not even get shipped until after the World Baseball Classic is over. Fanatics is just an absolute stain on this sport. Hate them as a company, do not want to support them. And it's a shame because like every kid, like, you get your shirt jerseys, you get just generic anything with your team on it and you're over the moon, right? Every kid wants to rock that jersey. They want to have their favorite style of their favorite player right across their back that they can proudly display to the entire world. That's at the top of every kid's Christmas wish list, birthday wish list, anything wish list as a kid. And companies like Fanatics just make it impossible to make something that should be such a staple of our culture and is a massive part of helping build the fandom of a team such an unreachable and unattainable gift for many people out there is so disheartening to see. because it is so much more fun when you can proudly rock your favorite team in your favorite way and show off your sports fandom and maybe even some weird ball knowledge. I've gotten a lot more shout outs for my Nolan Shanuel jersey in Fargo, North Dakota than I ever thought I would. But in the interim, I'll plug DHgate, very sketchy Chinese website, but I've gotten 3 jerseys off of there. They've all delivered. They at least appear high quality. They're not, but to the untrained, like, unless you're really gonna like sit down and study these jerseys, they look pretty good. They pass as real authentic jerseys. Certainly for the $25 I'm paying, including shipping to get them. Absolutely happy with it. Otherwise, yeah, shout out eBay, Facebook Marketplace, really anywhere else. The fact that I can get a 50-year-old jersey for a quarter of the price that I could get a World Baseball Classic jersey right now for a Hall of Fame player, Bert Blyleven, major name, absolutely massive ties to the Twins, not only as a player where he pitched 11 seasons, but as a beloved broadcaster. It just blows my mind. So I appreciate the options we do have. I encourage everybody to keep, doing your work, scouting the internet, trying to find good deals if that's what you're into for jerseys. But a big F you to Fanatics.
Yeah, never forget how they killed the shirt. See. Anyways, that's gonna wrap us up for this week. As always, you can find us on all the usual social media and places where you'd get your podcasts. We'll be back next week with another episode. We're only 3 weeks away from opening day, so lots of fun stuff coming up. I think once we get into the season, we'll do a lot more game by game breakdowns, talking about the highs, the lows, the in betweens of the season. So you're gonna want to be around for that. But as always, we appreciate you listening, and we'll see you next time.